you're having a restful Sabbath and enjoying the hopefully nice weather. This week we are in the Torah portion Shelah-Lekha, which is Numbers chapter 13, verse 1 through 15:41. So it's the entirety of those chapters. And this is where we have the story of the 12 spies who were sent into the land of Canaan, which is the land that they were to inherit. And they came back with a report of the land, but they essentially let fear and lack of faith get in their way. And as with so many other Torah portions before, we see the names of the men being listed as well as their fathers and the tribes that they're from, and they're listed in a certain order. And so I just want to go through our name exercise again like we've done before, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. And now remember, the only two who wanted to keep moving towards the land and obtain the inheritance that Yahweh had set aside for them were Caleb and Joshua, who at the time was named Hoshea, and his name was changed. The rest of them were too afraid to do it. And so the list begins with Reuben, the tribe of Reuben. His name means behold a son. And the person the spy sent out was Shammua, son of Zakur. And the meanings of those two names are renowned and mindful. Next we have the tribe of Simeon listed. Simeon means herd. And Shaphat, son of Hori, was sent. And Shaphat means judged, and Hori means cave dweller. Now I find this really interesting because if you read in the very beginning, they're scouting Canaan and they're being sent out from Paran. And Paran means a place of caverns or a lowland. And here you have Hori, which is the cave dweller. And it's interesting because Shaphat was of the tribe of Simeon, and he was one of the men who did not want to go into the land of the inheritance. He essentially came from a line of cave dwellers and wanted to keep dwelling in the caves. So I found that a little interesting. Next you have Judah, and here's Caleb, son of Jephunneh. And Caleb means dog, and Jephunneh means he will be facing or prepared. So I find this really interesting because it's saying that he's going to be prepared. And he is one of two who wanted to go in. He was prepared. And it's interesting that his name means dog. And he's of the tribe of Judah, which means praised. And as we know, Judah is the line from which we get the modern day Jews. Next is the tribe of Issachar, which means there is recompense. And Igal, son of Joseph, was sent. And those names mean he redeems. And Joseph, of course, means Yahweh has added. Next is Ephraim, which means double fruit. And here we have Oshea, which means salvation. He is son of Nun, which means fish, posterity. Oftentimes, the Hebrew letter Nun is correlated with life. And again, he was the second of the two who wanted to obey Yahweh and essentially take hold of the inheritance. So take the meanings of those names in that context as you will. Next is Benjamin, which means son of the right hand, and it was Palti, son of Raphu, who went. Palti means my deliverance, and Raphu means healed. Next is Zebulun, which means exalted. Gadiel, son of Sodi, went. God is my fortune and acquaintance. Next is the tribe of Joseph, and it's very careful to state here Manasseh. That is, Manasseh is what the phrase in Scripture is translated as. Now, Joseph means Yahweh has added, and Manasseh means causing to forget. And it was Gadi, son of Susi, who went. And Gadi means my fortune, and Susi means my horse. Next is Dan, which is the judge. And Amiel, son of Gamali, went, meaning my kinsman is God, and camel driver. Next is Asher, which means happy. And Sathur, son of Michael, who went. Sathur means hidden, and Michael, or Michael, means who is like God. Next is Naphtali, which means wrestling. Nabi, son of Vophsi, went. Nabi also means hidden, and Vophsi means rich. Last we have Gad, which means troop, and Geuel, son of Mahi, went, and that means majesty of God and decrease. Now, what's very interesting is that we see here, first, what's very interesting is that in verse 20, I'm just going to read it. He's essentially, Moshe is giving them the instructions to bring a report back to the land, and he's saying, find out all these things. Are the people strong? Are they weak? Are there a lot of them? Not a lot? How's the soil? Are there woods? Etc., etc. And then you have this aside message, and it says, now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes. And if you look up the Hebrew words there for a couple of the phrases in that sentence, essentially what you get is that this is the time of first fruits. And it makes sense. They have just received the Torah on Mount Sinai. We're all familiar with the idea that Torah was given on the Feast of First Fruits. This verse says it's the season of the first fruits, so it doesn't have to be on the exact same day. It's just around the same time. And I find that really significant because this is essentially these people's chance to, very first chance to bring their first fruits to Yahweh. And I don't think it's a coincidence that they're traveling into the land. Now remember, even though the Israelites didn't inherit the land for another 40 years, and we'll go into that in a second, these 12 people did enter it. They entered the land, and as you know, there are certain feasts during which you are to travel to the land. This is the time of the feast, and what is going to be their first fruit? Is it going to be faith, or is it going to be fear? And we find out that, unfortunately, for most of them, it's fear rather than faith. And the issue with this is that they're focused on their own strength, not on Yahweh and what He's done for them. So I want to read verse 31. Starting in verse 31, it says, the men who had gone up with him, Caleb, said, we cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we. Thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land they had scouted, saying, the country that we traveled and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are men of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we must have looked to them. No mention of Yahweh. They're just talking about we. They're talking about us. They're relying on their own strength. If you look at chapter 14, verse 11, Yahweh said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me, and how long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? How quick they were to forget and still rely on themselves instead of accepting and believing the fact that Yahweh was there in their midst, and He's there to fight for them. It doesn't matter how many people they are, or how big they are. Nobody can win against Yahweh. And the Israelites just for some reason weren't accepting that or believing it or feeling like it was enough. Unfortunately, the first fruits that they brought were not good first fruits. Now, chapter 14, verse 17 through 18. This is Moshe. He's pleading to Yahweh. He says, therefore, I pray, let Adonai's forbearance be great, as you have declared, saying, Yahweh, slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of fathers upon children, upon the third and fourth generations. This is exactly what Yahweh said when He put Moses in the cleft of the rock and covered it with His hand and walked by. And Moses is reminding him of this. He's calling this to his remembrance. Essentially what had been happening is that Yahweh decided Moshe was going to be the one from which the generations came from, and forget this group of people who just can't get their act together. And Yahweh doesn't totally do that, but what happens is He punishes that current generation. Now, just a few verses prior, chapter 14, verse 2, here's what the Israelites are saying. If only we had died in Egypt, or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is Yahweh taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. So their lack of faith actually makes them want to go back to slavery, essentially. Yahweh can't do that because that destroys the whole purpose. The whole idea is that we are free from sin. We are free from slavery. That's what he redeemed us from, so that we can be his servants, so that we can be servants of righteousness. If he allows the Israelites to go back to Egypt, then the whole story falls apart. So here's what happens. He gives them what they asked for. That current generation dies in the wilderness, all except Caleb and Joshua, or Hoshea, Yehoshua. His name is changed. Hoshea means salvation, as we just went over. The form of the name that he was changed to, Yehoshua, means Yahweh is salvation. And we're talking about how the Israelites are focusing so much on themselves. We can't do this. We can't fight against these people. No, but Yahweh can. And so Joshua's first name, meaning salvation, doesn't focus on Yahweh. But his new name does. Yahweh is salvation. And that's the point that they missed. They didn't have faith in that single fact. Remember, if we believe Yeshua is Messiah, Yeshua's name means Yahweh is salvation. Yehoshua, Yeshua. So if we believe that, then we're saved. We get the inheritance. Unfortunately, they didn't believe that. So that current generation was conscripted to die in the wilderness, which is essentially what they asked for. And Yahweh even says, your children, who you said would be carried away, they're the ones who will enter, but not you. And that's why they had to walk for 40 years through the wilderness, unfortunately. It was the disobedient generation that died off. So the 12 entered the land, but the entire community wouldn't possess it for another 4 years. Now, I like the way that the Torah portion ends, because it ties it back to everything. Why don't they have faith in Yahweh? Remember, I, Yahweh, am your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your Elohim. I, Yahweh, your Elohim. That's the point. He brought us out, he saved us, he redeemed us, so that he can dwell among us, we can dwell among him. We can dwell together. We, his people, he, our God. Unfortunately, just because of lack of faith, the first generation didn't achieve that. They were greatly grieved over this, says Scripture, and they decided to try to backtrack. They're like, no, we're ready. We're sorry. We are ready. Moshe says, don't do it. He's not with you. It's going to fail. They didn't listen. They tried, and they failed. So I think there's a lot that we can learn from this Torah portion. It's full of Messiah. It's full of the message of salvation. It's full of faith. If anybody tells you that faith doesn't exist in the Old Testament, bring them to this portion, because this is the whole story here about faith, belief in Yahweh, and obedience. They're tied together. I show my faith through my works. Show me your faith without your works. That's from the book of James. So that's what I have for the Torah portion today. I really enjoyed it. I hope you do too. There's one thing I forgot to mention. Good thing I remembered this. This goes back to the names in Caleb and Joshua. The number in which they were listed. Caleb was listed third of the tribe of Judah, and Hoshea or Yehoshua was listed fifth of the tribe of Ephraim. Now, Judah and Ephraim, I'm not going to beleaguer that point. We've already done it. Everybody's familiar with it. But number 3 is also the third letter in Hebrew is Gimel, which is likened to a man running after another, a poor man running after a rich man. And the sages liken this to running after the riches of Torah, running after Torah. That's what we should be doing. Torah is his heart. Torah is what he gave us after he redeemed us from the land of Egypt, so that we could be set apart people unto him, and so that he could dwell among us. 5, The fifth Hebrew letter is He, which means divine breath and revelation. So it's both. It's not just Torah. And what does God say? Worship me in spirit and in truth. His spirit, divine breath. Spirit brings revelation. And truth, Torah. There's no greater truth than that. You could say, no, truth is Messiah. Well, guess what? Messiah is the word of Yahweh. He is the living Torah. Torah made flesh. So there you have it. That's the revelation from this week's Torah portion. I hope you enjoyed it. And have a blessed week. And we'll see you next week. Shabbat Shalom.